The year 2021 is an anniversary year. 90 years ago, for the first time in the world, the first international conference on the need to protect the cultural heritage of all mankind was organized and held with support of the public. We are happy to travel to famous historical sites and museums and know about the UNESCO World Heritage List. Today, phrases like cultural heritage and protection of cultural heritage have become familiar to us. There are both national and international organizations for the protection of cultural property, which rely on national laws and international legislation, including the 1954 Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in wartime. Do we actually understand the value of cultural treasures accumulated over the history of mankind, architectural monuments, the works of true masters of art? It is hard to imagine London without Big Ben, Paris without the Louvre, Milan without its cathedral, Venice without its palaces and churches, just to name a few. It seems to us that they have always been and will always be with us. But every day, every year, a part of our common world history is getting lost. And only when we lose, we think about the losses, and we begin to understand that it is valuable for us. Few people know that the Hague Convention of 1954 is based on another document, the first international agreement on the protection of cultural heritage, which was signed in 1935. It is symbolic that this first contract was initiated by one person who was a lawyer, a famous artist, as well as a historian, archaeologist and public figure. His name was Nicolai Rerich. As a person who understood art, history and culture, and who understood their role for the development of mankind, Nicolai Rerich already at the beginning of the 20th century thought about the systematic protection of cultural monuments. He suggested the cataloguing of archaeological monuments and disapproved inexpert restoration. He also appealed to states and to take measures against looting of archaeological sites and to persistently educate in this respect people and therefore the public. In 1914, at the beginning of the First World War, Nicolai Rerich addressed the Supreme Command of the Russian Army, the governments of the United States and France, with the idea of concluding an international agreement on the protection of cultural property during the war. He created the poster "Enemy to the Human Race", in which he disapproved the destruction of cultural monuments, painted pictures such as "The Glow", expressing protest against the First World War. In 1929, Rerich again returned to the idea of concluding an international agreement by all countries of the world on the protection of cultural objects both during war and in peacetime. French lawyers of international law, Dr. Georges Claver and Professor Robert Joffre de la Pradelle, translated Rerich's idea into the language of law. And so the agreement with the name of the Rerich Pact was born. The Rerich Pact provides for the unconditional protection of cultural monuments, cultural and scientific organizations, cultural and scientific workers, not only during war, but also in peacetime. For such protection, a special sign was provided, the Banner of Peace. 3 emerald spheres in a circle on a white background, which denotes the past, the present and the future in the circle of eternity. Nicolai Rerich called it the Red Cross of culture. The Banner of Peace should be flown over all cultural monuments and institutions, marking them as a universal value and neutral territory. Then the painstaking work of spreading the ideas of the Rerich Pact and the Banner of Peace began. The Standing Committee of the Rerich Pact and the Banner of Peace sends the draft treaty to foreign governments, cultural institutions, and publishes it in various newspapers and publications. The noble idea of protecting culture for a common future was met by the public with enthusiasm. Many institutions and cultural figures as well as representatives of political circles, including the military, supported the draft of the Banner of Peace and the adoption of the Reich Pact. The International Directorate of Museums and the League of Nations approved the plan of the Reich Pact. In 1930, the committees of the Pact and the Banner of Peace were established in the cities of Paris in France and Bruges in Belgium. The interest shown by many countries led to the founding of the International Union for the Reich Pact to be located in Bruges. And in 1931, at the initiative of the president of this union, member of the Commission for the Protection of Monuments of Belgium, Camilla Tulping, an international conference in support of the Reich Pact was also held in Bruges. It is no coincidence that it was in Bruges, the capital of the Belgian province in West Flanders, that the first public-initiated conference on the protection of world cultural monuments was held. The city itself is widely known for its monuments of the past, whose historical roots go back to the 7th century. Time has preserved numerous objects of medieval culture and architecture here, so that Bruges is rightfully called a museum city. Nicolai Rerich wrote about the cultural and historical role of the city of Bruges. And where is another city in Europe where would the whole living way of life of antiquity be preserved in such inviolability? This inviolability of the beautiful is exactly what is needed when thinking about protecting the treasures of human genius. Providence itself has decreed that Bruges should be the permanent seat of our peaceful alliance. In 1931, from the 13th to the 15th of September, the first international conference in support of the Reich Pact was held in Bruges. The conference was attended by representatives of European states, cultural and public figures. But unfortunately, the first conference was held without the participation of representatives of England, Germany, and the Scandinavian countries. During the first conference in the Basilica of the Holy Blood, located in the center of Bruges, the Banner of Peace was consecrated, affirming the values of true spiritual culture above the concerns of everyday life. Let us recall the words of Nicolai Rerich about this event. The consecration of our banner was not by chance to take place in the Basilica of the Holy Blood, in the name of all the martyrs' blood shed for the beautiful truth. Where so many high symbols come together, there is a true stronghold. The conference brought important and concrete organizational results. Special attention was paid to the dissemination of the ideas of the Peace Pact in schools and higher educational institutions, as well as the need to introduce a single International Day of Culture. From a historical point of view, the conference was an important first step for the public to promote a great humanitarian cause. With the support of influential people, this conference gave an impetus to the awareness of the world's cultural heritage and its immediate protection. The ideas of the Reich Pact on the preservation of monuments of art and science were supported by international lawyers, as well as the President and members of the Permanent International Court of Justice in The Hague, the Grand Marshal of France, Pope Pius XI, President Masaryk, King Albert of Belgium, King Alexander of Yugoslavia. In addition to world universities and cultural centers, the noble ideas of the Banner of Peace were supported by well-known figures of culture and science, such as Romain Rolland and Bernard Shaw, Rabindranath Tagore and Thomas Mann, Albert Einstein and H.G. Wells. The ideas contained in the Reich Pact were supported by thousands of women's organizations, approved by the General Federation of Women's Clubs and the International Red Cross in Geneva. The second international conference in defense of culture was also held in Bruges in 1932. And in 1933, the third conference was held in Washington. The result of these conferences and the purposeful dissemination of the ideas for the protection of cultural monuments was the signing of the Rerik Pact on April 15, 1935, in Washington by dozens of American countries in the presence of US President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Therefore, the Rerik Pact is sometimes also mistakenly called the Washington Pact. In his speech, Roosevelt said, "By offering this pact for signature to all the countries in the world, we wish international recognition to become a vital principle for the conservation of the modern civilization. This pact has a deeper meaning than the text of the document itself." Unfortunately, the European states did not join or sign the Rerik Pact at the last stage. For this mistake, they had to pay a bitter price. Subsequent events showed that Rerik was not naive when he proposed to declare historical cities inviolable. He defended his position to the last possible moment to save such cities as Rome and Athens, Madrid and Vienna, Paris and Warsaw, Moscow and Leningrad, and complained that Berlin and London were indifferent to his appeals. It seems that Cleo herself, the muse of history, testified to the rightness of Nicolai Rerich's far-sighted actions. Surprisingly, the cities of Paris and Bruges, over which the banner of peace fluttered in the 30s, were saved from destructions. We know from history that the military, which was given the order to destroy Paris and Bruges, refused to comply with it. It was only the subsequent devastation of World War II that prompted the Dutch government in 1948 to raise again with UNESCO the need for a convention for the protection of cultural objects. In 1950, the New York Committee of the Rerik Pact submitted all documentation on the Rerik Pact to UNESCO. On the basis of the document of the Rerik Pact, a special commission of UNESCO prepared a draft international convention. And in May 1954, the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict was signed. These two documents, the Rerik Pact and the Hague Convention, are separated by 2 decades, which have absorbed the tragedy of the Second World War, the death of priceless treasures of art and their creators. It seems that they have made it obvious that it is necessary to prevent new tragedies, to learn to resolve inter-ethnic, class and religious conflicts without violence. But if you look at the news summary, then regularly there is information about the destruction of cultural monuments around the world. What's the problem then? The current situation with the protection of the world cultural heritage suggests that people have not yet realized the bitter experience of history, that society has not yet realized the evolutionary role of cultural heritage. So far it is evaluated mainly in a limited, consumer-oriented way, which means as a tourist attraction that can bring a solid income to the state treasury, or as historical symbol of a particular nation. For Nicolai Rerich, cultural monuments and the culture were not just the decoration of civilization. On the contrary, culture is the most solid foundation for the existence of a human community. He considered the language of art the most convincing, attractive and unifying. For Nicolai Rerich, a real stable world is possible not through fear of the law, but through the awareness of beauty. Therefore, he created the strategy Peace Through Culture, which is expressed in the legal language in the current treaty, the Rerik Pact. In the year of the first international conference in Bruges, Nicolai Rerich painted the canvas Flowers of Timor, where bonfires burn in the mountains, transmitting light from one peak to another. Through the fire telegraph, people sent messages from one end of the earth to another, participating in the spiritual sacrament, the transmission of fire and life through time and space. The Tower of Light is not just an image, but real human affairs. So, in the 20th century, at a tragic time for the planet Earth, when the course of history was programmed for war, a tower was built from which the light of culture is transmitted to us. In the 21st century, it is time for humanity to stop being just smart. In the new global world, people need to become wise, which means they need to learn to anticipate the consequences of their actions. In this sense, the story of the birth of the Rerik Pact can serve as a meaningful lesson for all of us to solve current problems. And today, the public organization International Center of the Reriks in Moscow is promoting the peace ideas of the Rerik Pact. Only public opinion can change the situation in the protection of cultural heritage. Each of us can contribute to the protection of cultural values by taking an interest and sharing information like this video with our families and friends. Today we remember with great respect the important role of the museum city of Brügge in the first international conference on the Rerik Pact in the preservation of the world cultural heritage. It is important to note that the very name of the city is very symbolic. Brügge means bridge. So, 90 years ago, here, in the center of Europe, a bridge was built leading to peace through culture. A bridge to the future, in which countries are united under the banner of peace in the protection of culture.